What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical average American, here today to react and learn about Newfoundland English. Apparently, people from Newfoundland, Newfoundlanders have a very unique way of speaking that has come to my attention. Now, I think I am pronouncing this correct. I actually looked this up on Google to coach me how you pronounce Newfoundland.
Newfoundland.
Right, so Google says it's Newfoundland. I think before I was saying Newfoundland, how it's spelled. Oh, you're from Newfoundland. And everyone was laughing at me or something. Oh, that American, can't even say Newfoundland. Well, joke's on you. I can now. So I can finally I can talk about this subject. I learned how to say it. But apparently, there's a very, very interesting, dialect, accent. I don't know what you'd call it, but it's a Newfoundland English. It has its own Wikipedia page when you look this stuff up. I never realized. I guess I figured, okay, Canada, it has Quebec. That's pretty unique as a province. It's doing the whole French thing, has its own way of speaking, and I thought, okay, that's probably one of the most unique places in terms of language. Then I discover Newfoundland, that it also has a very, very unique way of speaking English, as a matter of fact, that is quite different than the rest of Canada. I honestly had no idea. I had no idea. So if we look at this a little bit here, Newfoundland English is a term referring to any of the several accents and dialects of Atlantic Canadian English. Atlantic Canadian English, okay. That's apparently a thing. Class of Canadian English dialect. Interesting. Found in Newfoundland and Labrador. Most of these differ substantially from the English commonly spoken elsewhere in Canada and North America. Yeah, Canadians and Americans already talk, noticeably kind of different. And now there's this, where it's like ramping it up even further. I'm not even sure, but I have a video I'm about to pull up that's going to give plenty of examples and interviews of people talking and trying to discern exactly what's going on here with this version of Newfoundland English. It developed because of Newfoundland's history and geography. Okay, well, I won't go into too much detail there. I have this little video. Newfoundland English Explained. How to speak Newfoundlandese? Do people say that? Do Canadians say that? Newfoundlandese? Is that like a joke or something? Or is that serious? Anyway, the dialect of people who talk in Newfoundland, let's say. So, without any further ado, let's see what's going on in Newfoundland.
Yeah, I was talking to the RCMP this morning. Nobody ever told of it. I talked to the DFO there last night, and all the miners did anybody throw rocks at it. They'll press charges on it.
I don't know how to categorize that accent. That doesn't sound like any Canadian accent I've ever heard. I would have assumed this man was from Europe or something. Like the UK, maybe.
This is Newfoundland English, commonly known as Newfoundlandese, and is spoken here, in the island of Newfoundland just off the coast of North America.
Okay.
It's home to around 500,000 people, and it's known for its rich history of fishing and its very distinctive culture in comparison to the rest of Canada.
What on earth is going on here? So Newfoundland, geographically, is kind of off on its own corner, in a way, in Canada. It's one of the maritime provinces, has a big fishing and boating history.
Including and especially its variation of English.
Okay. Simple. What are you at? What are you at?
Yeah.
What are you at right now?
This is it.
This is it.
All right, what are you at?
If you were building a house, you also might respond, nothing.
What? I do not know what just happened. I think a Newfoundland conversation was happening here. Interesting.
And you can be...
Today, Newfoundland and Labrador is part of Canada, but Newfoundland didn't join Canada until 1949.
Wow! Newfoundland didn't join Canada till 80 years ago. 80! That's it. People are alive before Newfoundland was part of Canada. I had no idea that was a thing. Okay.
Before then, it was a British Dominion, and as a result, today has a culture that is a kind of mix between Canada and the British Isles.
Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. That explains so much right there. Oh, that's it. That's why. It was part of what, like the British Dominion or British Empire, whatever terminology he was saying. It was part of Britain for a long time, up until pretty recently, 80 years ago, then became part of Canada. That explains why the accent I heard already sounds a little British or Irish or... Yeah, and it's also mixed with like a Canadian dialect as well. I like this.
This also left a lot of linguistic artifacts in Newfoundland English. And
Okay.
that doesn't just mean an accent. See, an accent is just a difference in pronunciation.
Right.
It's the difference between accent and accent. But dialects are a lot more complex.
Ah.
A dialect is a difference in the actual grammar and structure of a language.
Oh.
These can be broken down into two main categories. First, they're standardized dialects. This means that the dialect is accepted and used in professional and formal settings, and especially in official institutions. An American president would have no problem saying the word elevator during a speech.
Huh. So are we saying that people who live in Newfoundland have a entirely different dialect? It goes beyond just an accent. It's a dialect, which means some of the words are different, and the sentence structures can be different. That's fascinating. It's a lot. Newfoundland, in regard to the way they talk, sounds much more unique, much more different from the rest of Canada than I even thought going into this.
So getting on an elevator and a woman clutching her purse nervously.
And a British Prime Minister would do the same with the word lift, even though they are dialectical differences. Then we have non-standardized dialects. These are dialects that aren't represented in institutional settings like schools, and usually aren't used in professional or formal settings.
Okay.
This is the category Newfoundland English falls into. And
What? I don't know if I really understand this or agree with it. I don't know if this is an opinion thing, but it's like if you live in Newfoundland and you talk a certain way, like you could still get a job in, like, say, the Canadian government or some kind of fancy position and talk that way. Like, just because you talk a certain way or with a certain accent, certain dialect, shouldn't mean that it's, like, considered not formal, unprofessional. Oh, how you talk is unprofessional. I don't really like that idea. It's just like it's where you grew up. That's your culture. That's how you talk. Like, it is what it is. There's nothing bad about that.
a big reason it's considered unprofessional is because we're often quick to dismiss smaller dialects as just plain gibberish. Even those of us who speak them often don't think too deeply about it, but there are actually very real rules, and they aren't just ignoring grammar.
Yeah, I mean, I say all that, but to be honest, this exists in the United States as well, with, like, southern accents, country accents in the United States. Like, people are definitely quick to make assumptions about Americans if they have, like, a really thick country accent, southern accent. So is that kind of similar to how Newfoundland accent is interpreted? Is that fair to say, or am I off here?
The phrase, "what are you at?" The word "at" roughly means doing, so the full sentence means, "what are you doing?"
What are you at? I love this. What are you at? It's so rolls right off the tongue. It's kind of nice.
This use of the word "at" is actually present in many Irish accents.
Very rural
Irish!
background, to live in a rural background. He's after going out and seeing the world. I can't give him advice. He knows what he's at.
It is related to the Irish accent, it would appear.
Another thing Irish English and Newfoundland English have in common is dropping the TH sounds in words. Mother becomes mutter, this
Oh.
becomes this. But
Wow, this is really similar to an Irish accent. Wow, in Canada. I would never have guessed.
Newfoundland English is more than just Canadian English with some Irish and British quirks.
Okay.
It's its own beast.
Okay.
It has its own individual vocab and even set in structure and grammar.
Wow.
Easily the most essential word in Newfoundland English is "by," which is a contraction of "boy." This can be used pretty much like dude or man. And
By. Contraction of boy. Hey, bye. What? That's weird to say. I've never heard anything like that. This is very, very unique. I am enjoying how unique this is.
You'll hear it all the time. He's weird, man. He's weird, bye. This word is actually also currently undergoing a pronunciation change among younger speakers, who are starting to favor the pronunciation ba. Probably the most...
Bah! Oh man, that's so funny how this is even changing right now. Like, in the current modern day, language is always changing. Even the Newfoundland accent and pronunciations are changing, where younger Newfoundlanders want to say ba instead of bye, which is instead of boy, which is instead of dude. I think I get it.
An interesting word, though, is la. Used in a sentence, it would look like this. Where's the car? Over there, la. So it's basically used to bring attention to a specific location or thing. A common misconception...
What? Is this at all like the Canadian use of a? Like, it's over there, eh? You could be like, it's over there, la. I think there's some similarities between la and a. I don't know. That's my knee-jerk reaction.
Is that it's short for look. But it actually more likely has its roots in the word lo, as in lo and behold. But Newfoundland English is also more than just funny words. There are actually rules as far as sentence structure and grammar go.
Wow.
The biggest and most basic example of how Newfoundland English deviates from other dialects is this. If you've ever taken a second language class, this will give you nightmares.
Oh my gosh, I didn't... Like, this is literally becoming like a language, like, course. Like, this is much more in-depth than I ever imagined. It's almost like you could study how people from Newfoundland talk. Like, the language has that many differences. I never imagined.
It's a conjugation chart, specifically for the present tense in Standard English. In Standard English, you basically just say the base form of the verb for everything except he or she, where the verb takes an S at the end.
Okay.
In Newfoundland English, we would just put an S at the end of all of them. I like how simple it is.
Wow, that just changes everything. It's such a small difference. Changes everything. Yeah, that's not an accent change. That's a whole different dialect. That's a good example. You likes to eat poutine, right? Like, it makes... Yeah, okay, I get it. And I get how... That's so jarringly different. I get how people would immediately... Probably Canadians would be like, okay, you're from Newfoundland. Like, instantly recognizable.
Another quirk of Newfoundland English is that the past participle is the same as the simple past tense. And what that means is that instead of saying, have you written the letter, we would just say, have you wrote the letter? But there...
Have you wrote the letter? Like, even the past tense and plural tenses of words are used differently. I keep saying this, but I'm astonished at how different this is. Like, this is just a province in Canada that is doing totally their own thing.
There is another, even more interesting way to describe the past tense in Newfoundland English, and that is using the word after. I'm after writing the letter. What this refers to is that the present moment is after the event of you writing the letter. This also comes from Irish English. Here's the thing, though. If you talk to a Newfoundlander, you're not necessarily guaranteed to hear all this. People who grow up speaking Newfoundland English are usually extremely talented at varying the amount of Newfoundland English that slips into their speech.
What? Wow. Maybe it's because they're like worried about, okay, if I go into other parts of Canada, I don't want to sound a certain way. It's kind of sad, honestly, but impressive. A lot of people from Newfoundland have the ability to shift between how much of a Newfoundlander they sound like.
And can pretty much operate on a gradient from very thick dialectical speech to standard English.
What? So if a bunch of Newfoundlanders get together and don't want to be understood, they can just ramp it up to 100. 100 out of 100, and just talk in Newfoundlandese, or whatever this video called it, and no one will understand what they're saying. It's kind of cool. It's kind of like a superpower, or, like speaking another language, basically.
The Newfoundland dialect also tends to be thicker in more rural areas. This isn't because Newfoundland English isn't correct. It's just that these groups tend to be less likely to need to speak with people who may not know the dialect. It's important to realize...
Wow, I mean, I have to say, this dialect seems more extreme than even the Southern American dialect. Like, hey there, sweetie, how's it going? Like, there's nothing about that you cannot understand. It's just, like... Maybe it's the American in me. Like, I'm just so used to having heard it that it sounds so simple. Do Canadians have trouble understanding Newfoundlanders sometimes, or is it very, very clear? Like how I can clearly understand Southerners in America. That's a question I would wonder about.
Realized that just like English is our first language, Newfoundland English can be considered our first dialect. And sometimes it's hard to articulate ourselves in a foreign dialect, and there
Right.
just aren't always going to be exact translations.
Right.
One thing I personally struggle with is a very specific verb form, the word bees. Bees is used to describe an action that is ongoing. For example, if somebody were to ask me, how do you spend your time? I'd say, I be making videos. And
I beat bees instead of I. This is like I be making videos instead of I am making videos. Instead of I'm making videos, I be making videos, but it's I bees making videos. Like I kind of, given enough time, could probably understand what they're saying, but it is quite different.
And there's really no easy way to describe that the same way in standard English.
I cannot believe some of these rules about the Newfoundland dialect. These are so much more drastic than I thought they would be. This is so fascinating.
I could say I make videos in that example, but another example is if I were sick and I said I be coughing and sniffling. And that would more closely translate to I've been coughing and sniffling. So there are ways to translate it into standard English.
I like it. I be's coughing and sniffing. It's satisfying to say.
But really they're just approximations, just like translating from a different language. In addition to being related to dialects from the British Isles, Newfoundland English also shares similarities to southern US dialects.
There you go. I think that's why subconsciously I've been making all these comparisons to Newfoundland English and Southern American English. There's a lot of parallels here, and it's even in this video.
For example, in the South, you'll often hear people use the phrase right quick to mean very quickly.
Yeah.
Newfoundland English uses the word right very similarly.
Huh.
Here it's used as a general synonym of very or really, applicable to any situation.
Right, okay.
Newfoundland English has also
I just said it. Right.
been compared a lot to African American vernacular English, or Ebonics, which uses the same verb form bees, except they drop the S. Some
Yeah.
communities in Newfoundland also conjugate to do to do's.
Yeah, I feel like you be doing that. Like, it almost reminds me of like a Jamaican accent or something.
Just like the title of this JB Smoove special. And just like Newfoundland English, Ebonics is oftentimes looked down upon for not being proper. People just not knowing how to speak English. But
Yeah, I think that is, I just think that's ludicrous. It's silly. It's like, oh, you're not speaking proper. Like, okay, it's literally like a whole dialect, a whole culture of people speak that way. Who are you to come in and be like, that's not how you say that. That's not right. That sounds silly. Like, no, you're silly. You're being silly. You be silly. Is that how a Newfoundlander would say it? You be silly. You be's silly. And they'd be like, oh, got me.
dialects like these aren't wrong. They're just as right as any other dialect, no matter how standardized or non-standardized they are. As long as the dialect facilitates communication,
Yeah.
it's right. Dictionaries don't define English. English defines dictionaries.
Yeah, right. Wow. Is that the end? I think it is. What's going on here? Okay, I think that's the end. Okay, yep, there you have it. Wow, Newfoundland English Explained. That was fantastic. I'm so glad I found a video on this exact subject. It was fantastic. This was by Brain Sale, and I liked that a lot. That did a great explanation of the history of how this occurred, this phenomenon, Newfoundland, this case study, this awesome thing that exists in Canada, the history, and a lot of examples. I'm very happy with how many examples he was trying to give of actual, unique words and phrases and sentence structures people from Newfoundland use on a daily basis. That was so interesting. And again, I just got to reemphasize, this came out of nowhere for me. I was like, okay, Canada, yeah, different regions of Canada talk a little different from each other. Different provinces have slightly different ways of talking. That was my understanding. Then Newfoundland just pops out of nowhere. It's like, hey, listen to this. And it's like, whoa, that's awesome. That is such a cool thing. The diversity of speech and just the diversity of ideas and cultures within Canada is so fun to learn about and so cool that exists. So I enjoyed this a lot, I have to say. Anyway, if you enjoyed this as well, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Canada and Canadian culture, stuff about Canada I've never learned or seen before, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.